Hello, guys. Before we jump to presentation, I just want to mention that this night was so long for me because after yesterday's workshop, a lot of things has changed to me. Not to you guys who visited that workshop and were scary eyes about the UI components. My eyes were also the same, but inside. So I was trying to keep my face calm. So thank you for that. I learned a lot about UI components yesterday. So that's why that's also reflected on my presentation. Yes, thank you. You see that, yeah, I will do anything I can to have you accepted the fact that UI components is something that you shouldn't call just UI components, because I don't want to have this word like noticeable as something like very, very complicated. So you will be telling these scary tales to your children, grandchildren, about how that went with Magento 2. So, and that's just the reality. So really the intention behind the UI components was to build something that will allow you and enable you to build pretty everything. So before we continue, I want to show you this. Today it's a lot of historical, some phrases quoted, and this one of them from wiki page. The open source software may be developed in a collaborative public manner. I like here only one word, may be, but may not be. And this screen has two screenshots, two pieces from the GitHub. The very first pull request occurred like 5, maybe almost 6 years ago, and the very last. For the time of like 1 hour late, we have the 277 pull requests plus one from some guy, Vitaly B. I want to thank you all guys who submitted pull requests. That's very important that we all operate in open source environment. We're really very far from open source collaborative approach for developing Magento 2. But I say that in future we will get to that point when we will be collaborating and developing much more than it is right now. But in the same time, if we see that how many open pull requests we have, it's quite a lot, around 300. In the same time, we have around 800 or like in 50, 3 already being processed. So this is very cool. Another part of statistics I want to show you, and now we slowly moving to the UI component stuff. So this is a statistic about the files count in Magento 1 versus Magento 2. And we see the JavaScript files in Magento 1. It's very straightforward statistic. I run just one command, clog, and it showed me that in Magento 1 we used to have only 386 JavaScript files, while in Magento 2 you see that number? 12,000 files. 12,000. In PHP, we have double size, so double size, from 12K to 24K. And in XML, it's quite the same. If we have a look into lines of code, it gives us a little bit interesting statistic that while we have 4 times more JavaScript files, a line of code not that much bigger. It's not even in 2 times. It's like 1.6 times more lines of code for JavaScript. While it's the same, keep the same for PHP. You see that 2 times more lines of code in PHP. And for XML, it's even less. So if some of you think that in Magento 2 we overuse XML declarations and definitions, it's just not true. We have the less lines of code in XML because it's more targeted, nodes of flow with some unnecessarily detailed definitions of something. So that's why in JavaScript you can observe that while its really amount of code is decreasing, it's because of the good reasons. And these reasons is if we want to have Magento 2 really standardized, and we apply the same rules, the same restrictions, and the same policy, and that damn thing mentioned by Max, that we're trying to apply our best practices to all areas. And JavaScript is one of these. You know, we've been ignoring also the JavaScript needs for many years in Magento 2. That's only 1 year old front-end team in Magento 2. We've also been refusing this idea that we need to invest a lot in Magento 2 front-end. We thought that, yeah, it will be somehow flowing down the road, and by the end of the day, we will get the perfect framework. It's not just the truth. So we started investing just a year ago. So modularity of JavaScript is the case. You see the 12K files gives you that less lines of code in result because we have just JavaScript more granular. Instead of super heavy and big JavaScript classes and objects, they're all small, tiny, because we applied the same rule as we applied to PHP, granularity and modularity. And this rule is for you also to use it when you develop the JavaScript, not only PHP, same stuff. One responsibility for one class. Don't mix the JavaScript class where you have intention to manipulate with DOM object and in the same time have some API methods available for communicating with external widgets and so on. So don't do that. Put it into two different classes. Use require.js as the main mechanism for dependency injection. And also JavaScript is configurable. If in Magento 1 the plenty of JavaScript was configured via inline JavaScript. Yeah? So we had access to inline script node and just put some configuration from PHP to some variable and then pass it to some instance of jQuery widget and so on. It's not going to happen anymore for your asynchronous JavaScript. It will be really hard to pass configuration, especially if this configuration is not really dependent on the exact place where this module is used. Why you need every time when you use it, copy and paste the same configuration. So that's why require.js, it helps us to improve this. Another thing is that JavaScript now is extensible. Extensible even more than require.js provide natively out of the box. Despite the fact that we are not really moving fast to new versions, and thank you for these observations. I think we will put that to the roadmap. And to get more security features. In the same time, the module interceptors, which we can also call as the mixins, maybe some of you already used. And these mixins allows you to intercept the moment when JavaScript module has been created and you can change any aspect of this object. That works the same as in PHP side of things. You have with dependency injection plugins and interceptors mechanism and even more. And also JavaScript is reusable because UI components and no inline JavaScript lets you reuse the PHP, XML, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, all these pieces all together within one UI component entity. And yeah, I also mentioned the dependency injections, so we can move forward. And the intention, as I said, is to have this standardized and in the same time unified. We definitely don't want to say that we're going to throw away the old rendering mechanism. You shouldn't think that you should throw away all the baggage you have of the knowledge. Your knowledge is about the rendering on server side with standard layouts, blocks, and PHTML templates. Just consider this as a UI components, just next logical step. If you were attentively discovering the UI component in Magento, especially in PHP side, you will see that it extends the same block interface. So that being said, that your UI component is not necessarily something that renders only on storefront, only in browsers, sorry. It's something that you can just assign the old-fashioned PHTML templates and it will be rendered on the server side while you use the XML, semantics XML declaration for your, let's say, block or UI component if you wish. So that allows you to judge and decide and maybe change while your application evolves, if you want to render something or front-end or server, is it something that is private or that's something that is shared? So it could be rendered on this server side and then cached to Varnish. And the intention is to not give in Magento 2 two different interfaces, two different experiences, but to merge it into one. Not all these intentions are already implemented and have good implementation in result, because I want to just even highlight, if you know that we use SimVer policy, we use versioning for the module. Does anyone know what the version of module Magento UI? 2.0.0. While the catalog is 2.1.2, I believe the customer is 2.0.10. I think we have plenty of numbers to improve Magento UI components. It can be just infinite numbers, right? So it's not something that's final. It's going to be evolved more and more. Some new ideas from you will be encountered and implemented. So that's why unification, you can render on the server side and move to the front, and both supporting synchronous rendering and asynchronous rendering. Then it's suitable for rendering shared content that's supposed to be cached to Varnish, and private content that's supposed to be rendered via JavaScript utility with API calls, web API calls to obtain the data. The same for classic versus single page rendering model. So we know that in Magento 1 doesn't even try it and implement it on Magento single page application. Have you guys with this experience? No. I'm not sure if your client's not requesting these features, but I really know that for Magento 1 that will be really painful to build one-page application because of a lot of reasons, and UI components are going to solve it, because they're already designed having the asynchronous rendering in mind, and as well as progressive rendering in mind. It's not yet features built into Magento, but you should just realize that if we're talking here about rendering in JavaScript using the quite famous and well-known the web component approach, actually UI component is just another word for your web component thing. So you should understand that we're much more closer to progressive rendering in Magento with UI components. And also, as I said before, PHTML or XHTML templates are available right away in Magento starting from 2.2 or maybe even beta version, so you can use it. Not everywhere, and that's only just basic capabilities, but still UI components are going to combine all this experience into one. So now I think that we have these three double letters, I think, World Wide Web, and I started playing with these letters. So what we can just maybe think that we need to answer three questions. That's all the time in my life, yes, in our life. What, where, and when. And the question, what I need to know about UI components, quite logical. I think you all have this question. And where you can find the information about UI components, and where UI components will be available in their final state. I'm not sure that it will going to happen. So in open source, anytime for any kind of application. But at least UI components will become as a main or maybe the only rendering framework in Magento. While we not necessarily have answer to all these questions, but I can answer the last one, when it's just happening right now, these very days. And where and what information you can find, the answer is also obvious and nothing new to you and to me. Here we go, documentation. Documentation portal, devdocs.magenta.com. Has anyone read the whole list of articles related to UI components guide? Raise your hand. One. Have you understood something? Okay, so that is pretty cool. So I just want to say, that's also the question. That's interesting. If I have something very complicated and I cannot really understand it just by looking to the code, and I have documentation, and once I read the documentation, I still have no clue. Where is the issue? It could be in the code, or it could be in documentation. So that's why here we also, I will use something not standard, we have that magic link that will allow you to say in very vocal, in very sensitive to us manner what you wanna hear, to read, and in what content you wanna have us invest in the very next period of time, next milestone. So use this link. This should be a very popular link, but so few people hidden it. So please welcome to DevDocs and read. I was just surprised this very night once I went through this article how many documentations we have related to AI components. Never been so for layouts or anything else. And it seems like people don't use it. So I let you to things that you can appreciate today, tomorrow, and so on. You may just express your appreciation to our work that we did because of your requests. So we build this documentation. Please use it. Please read it. And I think many, many things will become more clear to you. Okay. Now, is Ben here?
He's here.
Okay. Now in terms of what, I want to raise another question for what. When it comes down to rendering with JavaScript application, we realize that a lot of different data that should be taken into account to render some byte of information. That's a user input data. If you take such entity, such component, as a form, it's a user input data that plus some form metadata to know what kind of fields should be rendered, what type of fields, what the validation rules, and so on. And some additional widgets may be included. For example, for date time field, it's some separate standalone widget providing you the calendar. So all these data should be rendered. And now, my question, especially to Ben, what the first number represents here? Any clue? 4,400.
Wasn't that a popular television series?
Okay, that's exact number of words in the Constitution of United States of America.
I don't think that applies anymore.
And then, of course, original Constitution. And on that side, we see the amount of words required to describe product form. And if you think that we overuse words here, it's just not true. I knew that you would be laughing, but I went through this big JSON object, transitioned it to the browser, and these are kind of layout representations for JavaScript application. And I went through single key, and I checked all words are really required here. So why only few, like thousands versus so many required? Because that describes something stateful, which are not supposed to be changed. But yeah, unfortunately. But form, by its nature, design is something that just designed to be changing continuously because of any reason. Some additional sub-requests, some additional user interactions occurred, or some customization, anything can affect to the form and it might be changed. Another question is where I should locate and how I can locate the elements. It used to be in old ancient world that people have been using jQuery to locate elements. Just forget about that. It's not just gonna work not even far, but very close future. You shouldn't do that because all should be designated to special kind of application that should be involved into your framework. It's a kind of any you like templating engine. Personally, in Magento, we selected Knockout because it's quite simple, straightforward, doesn't obligate you to follow very strict rules, and it's not even framework, it's just a library, a set of features, and we use I can just narrow down to only two things. One is templates, and just templating engine, and the second one is observables. And that's it, you should know, that's all that you should know about Knockout. And the last question, when it's going to happen, some user action or because of some reason, the DOM elements may appear or disappear. That can happen anytime. So that's why you cannot just write desynchronous JavaScript. Within each day, within each new brand, some user experience that going to provide mobile world or maybe even desktop with this progressive rendering, the DOM is not something immutable. It can be changed every time. So you cannot write the synchronous JavaScript when it comes down to manipulating with DOM. All these issues, all these ideas is the basis for UI components. So that's why they exist, because they're addressing all these issues. We have only 10 minutes left. I'm not sure that we can just walk through all the aspects of these challenges that we think that we solved pretty much. We did pretty much good job. I think that in solving these issues, it's not easy at all to understand it. In the same time, if you trace, how many of you using Xdebug or some other profiling tool in PHP? I wouldn't say it's too much. I would say even comparing with the benefits you're getting from that, it's too few people here using this tool. So it's definitely improving things when especially you work with some code that you never knew before, and you need to get the understanding in the full speed to deep dive into this code to get how that works. The Xdebug definitely helps. So I think the tracing JavaScript code also should become for you something very familiar and convenient to do once you dig into the core implementations. So first challenge we address it is isolation. If you have a look to the product form, you won't see this something very natural and standard for HTML. You won't see the form tag. We don't need form tag because we're not going to submit form with the standard HTTP GET request. Anyway, this form is for post, and we are not going to post the entire page. It's just not convenient from many perspectives. So that's why it will be AJAX request. So it will be AJAX request, why we need form. We don't need form. So now you open, if no form tag, you can render within the form any sub-forms, as many as you wish. They can be in the same DOM tree without affecting to each other. So that's why the isolation aspect is something that is solved with UI components. We don't care where element that's supposed to be submitted is located. This UI component can be rendered on the top of the page, bottom, within the form area, or outside. Just using JavaScript view model mechanism, you can link the property from that field to any data model of any form on a page, and it will be submitted. Doesn't matter in which location. At the same time, we do support the bare HTML includes. So if the form you see on the product page or any other admin page is built on the UI components, you should know that you can embed the old-fashioned, the fancy, lovely, some pieces to this form built on jQuery UI on other stuff. The only thing that is required in this case, just put this attribute data form part and mention the name of the form, so our collector will grab automatically all these fields and just will include this to the main payload. So it's pretty extensible and in the same time isolated. So on this screen, I just wanted to show you the tab on the product form where we have inner grid is displayed. On one of the tabs, we have the grid with filters. So if we would use the old approach, all these fields would be submitted, right? When they hit the form submit, they all will go to the backend. I don't want this, so then I need to think how to build some workaround to prevent submitting these fields if they're physically within the form tag. With our components, you just don't care about this at all. Another thing that convinced even our product owners when we've been implementing such feature as a staging that we had in a rush, in very hurry process to change the product form from the old-fashioned to the new UI component. And one of the drivers was the issue described in this piece of HTML. And this issue is about that in staging, you have the pop-up that displays you the same form the same form built on the same data, the same configuration, but only for some future version, right? That's how staging works, for some future version. And it resulted that on the page, you have all elements doubled. If you used some ID, HTML ID, if you used some selectors, they are not any longer unique. And we found that old form been heavily used and overused the jQuery and other some bad inline JavaScript practices, referencing to the elements by some not very strict IDs or selectors. So it resulted that we found that it's better to completely redesign than invest in trying to find all these issues and solve them one by one. Interaction. Interaction is something that also is very important. So the form interacts with user. And on this screen we see the tab where new custom options can be added on the product edit form. And this custom option has the property type, and depending on this type, the part of the form will be re-rendered and new elements will appear. So you need to react. You need somehow to link components one with each other. And as usual, normally, if you have good front-end experience in Magento 1, you should recall the things such as some inline JavaScript associated to some field with hard-coded selectors which says, okay, if that field has value like that, then disable that field. And this all the time required the writing inline JavaScript code, almost all the time. That's super heavily used in the admin panel system configuration form for shadowing elements and putting some dependencies between the selectors and so on. While in UI components, we decided, yeah, it will be maybe tough for people who will prefer using imperative coding in JavaScript, but we decided to not introduce a JavaScript API, but give you a lot of configurable settings that you may configure in XML to UI components. And we have, someone from you can say, enormous amount of these configurable settings. But I want to again return back to Portal. That was another surprise tonight for me. I found the most important properties are described on the dev docs. So you can find, and yesterday on the workshop, that also was another kind of surprise. I found that people were staring like a first time, looking, staring on the screen and trying to understand what did property mean, links versus imports, exports. I wish at that very moment I opened the portal and said, ta-da, here we go. In Magento 2, things really different than in Magento 1 because we have documentation and it describes pretty well everything that you need to know about UI components and not only. So that's why for interaction, I think you will find all information on the DevDocs portal, and it will find the description why we use Knockout and what the benefits it gives, and as I mentioned, a two-way data binding with Knockout.js. And I want to mention that we appreciate another policy and best practice. We want to hide the SPI implementation from you as a developer, so you're going to customize the product. And we're going to provide you API. So that's why if you will be searching for the usages of KO alias for Knockout, it's just KO, I think that with respect to the entire set of JavaScript files we have in Magento, you will find that only few of them uses Knockout as a direct dependency, because we build some sort of helpers and wrappers to have you not dependent on Knockout, because that's just the reality that we have in front end. As Max mentioned it before, the front end is moving very fast, and any moment, any new framework, really much more better may occur, and we all here wanted to migrate. So that's why we need to hide the SPIs, the service providers such as templating engine or some low-level manipulations with DOM should be just hidden from you. If you see that we have a lack of such wrappers and adapters, you mentioned that somewhere, and don't be shy and say, okay, you break here the rule, like the guy, I'm sorry, forgot his name, mentioned about the inversion of control policy. That's the just brilliant presentation presentation. So I'm looking forward to get these slides, pictures, and show some of our guys in my team. So we really need to follow these rules. So linking capabilities, as I mentioned, links, imports, export are described well on the portal. And performance, in addition to the benefits we have in Magento 2 with FPC and private data retrieval with AJAX calls that really improve performance, we also have performance improvements in the JavaScript rendering itself. So native knockout, even direct binding such as for each or each, they're really slow because when it's come down to the refreshing the data grid, when you hit the new page, it was refreshing the entire DOM structure of all rows. So all TR elements being refreshed, just recreated. So when you put the number items on the page like 200 on 1000, you experience it in maybe in some old version, I don't know, before 2.2 or before 2.0, sorry, maybe beta. It was really harmful to user experience if you use the paging with 1000 elements configured. The pager was really slow. And so we just added another plugin that just introduced the binding repeat, and repeat does the very simple thing. Instead of redefining the DOM structure of the tables, table nested elements, it just changed the actual values. Only text fields are being refreshed in the table, so it works super fast, just fast as it's really possible in JavaScript. And the same thing will be improved in the form. And in form, it's only from 2.1.3, I believe, we improved the rendering in form. We found that some clients have really up to 400 and 500 product attributes, and they all been rendering on these hidden tabs, collapsed tabs. And we found that, yeah, that's maybe a bad idea. So let's just initialize these components which are hidden but don't render them. And that improved the situation for the form and for the big trees. If you have thousands and thousands categories, now they will be fast in really rendering fast in the product edit page. When you assign categories to the product, you'll notice starting from 2.1.3 for the thousands or even millions pages, it will categories, it will work really fast. So these improvements will also continuously applying, and JavaScript files bundling, just I don't have time really to mention a lot. For extensibility, I'm getting speed up, Ben. I'm hearing you. So UI components, they are a sort of, as I mentioned, the next step, next evolutional step for layouts. So if you see right now the layouts definition, you see some block with different names and different PHP classes assigned, and you as a front-end developer need to know what PHP class you need to bind to this block, what name you need to give this block, what kind of arguments this block does accept. So you're pretty familiar with this workflow for the front-end developer with respect to layouts. Actually, with UI components, it's quite, for now, the same experience. It's just another set of XML files, which are just like extraction from the layout into separate files, but we've done, so far, one tiny thing improved. They're a little bit semantic. So instead of just block class, you see this something like listing, column, field set, and so on, filter. So these semantics give you a sense what you want to build. You define the structure, but it's pretty similar to what you have in layout. You can assign PHP class to this component or reassign the default class. You can assign the template, and it could be either PHTML or XHTML template, so it could be rendered either on the storefront, on the admin panel. Not all these mechanisms work because it's just the very first implementations. So far, we invested into the rendering mechanism only in browser. On the server side, we're really not ready to say that UI components, something that you really heavily can use for rendering either in browser or the server. But that's just the truth, that the intention, and someday that will be the reality. And so far, you already can use the PHTML templates, as I mentioned it. They have the same pretty methods available as you have in blog. You can get access to any nested child elements and render these children in any place you wish, so the same experience. Extensibility model is pretty good because of required JS mixins, and as I mentioned it, for asynchronous renderings, that information may be clear only to those attended yesterday's workshop, but you can dig into the dev portal and find, I believe, if not so, that article will be pretty soon available, how asynchronous features work and allow you to build the components without dependency on the sequence of rendering, on the sequence of instantiating these components. So that's the summary, quick words. So we used to have XML layouts. Now in addition we have XML UI components layout. For JavaScript that's kind of the same layout as for PHP. Even layout.js file is responsible to handle it. In addition to blocks, we have UI components which are quite the same as blocks because they implement the same interface. So UI components is just the next generation for blocks. PHTML templates now can be used for UI components and extra HTML templates. And inline JavaScript is just abandoned, forbidden, not allowed, not propagated. Don't use it at all. You got my point. And instead of that, modular JavaScript, we require JS. And instead of coarse-grained JavaScript, fine-grained JavaScript files. So the last slide on this presentation is some word featureability. I don't know, I just invented that word by myself. Maybe I'm not the first one, but still, I like it. So we want to have our platform to have this ability, to have the future, to not stuck somewhere in the past. Because when Magento appeared, that was so cool because that was so new. And now I understand that with Magento 1 is having this a collection of knowledges you all have in Magento 1, it can be so painful to move to something new, but in the same time, guys, we all need doing this. Because we want to have Magento to have a future. Yes, we're moving to the enterprise level. In the same time, it's not just about the enterprise to have the good face and the good shape in front of mature platforms and trying to say, yeah, we also have that new modern feature, bleeding edge framework involved. It's not about that. It's just something that's already been proved for many years, and we're really a little bit behind even the schedule, while for you it's something like new. I want to say, no, it shouldn't be something new. It's something very special, interesting, and cool. So that's why these all modern technologies are discussing between developers right now, internally in our company, and as well as some of you from the community also, we have discussion around all this stuff. So should we use PHTML on and remain and supporting them that far long, or maybe let's make final decision and move to HTML, or maybe at least tweak and so on, or support both, or maybe say, okay, let's community to the judge. And the same questions to all these items. Less SAS, okay, but guys, come on, it's already post CSS. Why are you talking about less SAS? It's so. Okay, React, Angular 2, or Aurelia. There's also Aurelia. So have anyone heard about the Aurelia? But that's something that's really so cool. Why we should talk about even React, as some guys can say, okay, why didn't Magento choose React as the main framework for working, dealing with DOM? Okay, guys, because there is Aurelia. Why we should choose React? So, but the Aurelia will be so new to you. So that's why we stick with something that we have homemade, at least. We can justify why we're doing some things or another. And require JS or maybe Webpack, who knows? And ECMAScript 6 plus Node.js, that's absolutely the only, I think, the option that in not far future we all will be observing, that will become a standard and the main development environment, and who knows, maybe even production. So that's the future ability. I think we're quite ready to something from this list implement or start discussion, or maybe say no. Okay, so we all have open mind. I mean, as a front-end even development team, we carefully listen to all your suggestions, even whinings, anything. We hear everyone. Big eye, observing. And Q&A, and another piece of advertise of DevDocs portal. Sorry, but it's really important. Q&A, you have questions? No? What kind of question?
No, you always leave me speechless.
Then thank you guys for being attentively listening to it. Thank you all.